Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular council meeting of Tuesday, March 22nd. I will call the meeting to order and ask if you will stand and join us in O Canada.
The last 2 years, we've lost our voice.
Thank you for that. I'll just ask if you'll join me in a moment of silent reflection and perhaps keep the people of Ukraine in our thoughts. Thank you. Item 2.3 is the adoption of the open session agenda. Councillor Vail.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor Richardson, that the agenda for the open session of regular council meeting of Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022 be adopted as circulated and with the following amendments. Addition, item 7.3, correspondence pertaining to item 14.1.1 on the agenda, being a bylaw to amend bylaw 2019-077, a bylaw to regulate the operation of ATVs and ORVs on municipal highways in the city of Kawartha Lakes.
Thank you. All in favor? And that's passed. We have everybody here present in council today, so welcome. Disclosure, any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on the open session agenda today? Seeing none, notices and information by members of council. Anyone on council have anything they would like to announce? Councillor Dunn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to read a very brief letter into the record. As you all know, because it was announced in an open council meeting, I have been subject of an investigation by the Integrity Commissioner. He has responded to the allegations, and he says, "I wish to advise I have now completed my investigation into the complaint, and I have determined no contravention of the city's code of conduct and ethics was committed by Councillor Dunn with respect to the above matter complaint. A copy of the report is set forth in the details of the investigation and the decision attached for your information. This matter is concluded." Signed, Charles A. Harnick. And anybody who wants a copy of the actual report, just give me a shout and I'll fire it off to you.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson, Deputy Mayor Richardson, sorry.
Thank you, and through you. I've noticed a lot of community events are returning to our little villages and hamlets and whatnot, and I know a lot of the wordage out there right now is that we're short volunteers. So I'm saying anyone that's new to our communities or past residents, jump in and help your communities right now as we return to the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore.
Thank you. Just like to congratulate John Thurston of Dunsford. He participated in the Paralympics, Winter Olympics, and his curling team won a hard-earned bronze medal. So congratulations to John Thurston and his team for that in the Paralympics. Well done.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly?
Yeah, just for that, I think they had a special day and night for John at the Peterborough Curling Club this week, and after he came back with his medal. So anyways, I just want to remind people the Spotlight in Agriculture is on Friday night at Lindsay Lex, social at 5:30 and dinner to follow.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll make a quick announcement here. Jump in the Lake Challenge is on in the Coboconk area for the Summit Wellness Center. I know it's been advertised, takes place on Saturday, May 7th, 2022. Last year, 40 participants braved the chilly Kawartha Lakes water to raised over $53,000 toward the Wellness Center. It's quite a community up there, and this year's goal is 100,000. And I know our Councillor Yo always participates and loves to jump in the lake to cool off a bit. And I hear this year our Deputy Mayor is participating as well, so congratulations. So there's lots of information on their website of how you can donate if you don't want to jump in the lake, but certainly a good cause for a good community event. Thank you. The staff have any announcements? None that we know of. Thank you. We'll move down to item 5, which is council minutes. I need a motion that the minutes of the February 22nd, 2022 regular council meeting be received and adopted, please. Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. All in favor? That's passed. Deputations. We've got a couple of deputations, 3 deputations. I'll just remind everyone that you have 5 minutes to do your deputation. Item 6.1, our first one, is regarding the corporate waste reduction vision. Item 9.3.36 on the agenda, and Mr. David Webb is joining us. Can you hear me, Mr. Webb?
I can so, yep, you can hear me?
We can hear you okay. Please go ahead.
Excellent, great. Well, thanks very much for giving me a few minutes to share with you. I'm here today to ask council to demonstrate that the city of Kawartha Lakes continues to be willing to take bold steps to reduce waste, and that the corporate waste reduction vision that is being presented later today be given a target of 70% reduction of corporately generated waste by the end of 2023. The city has in the past made some really tough waste reduction and diversion decisions benefiting the city greatly. The decision to move to clear plastic bags was a very bold step involving a huge cultural change. It was difficult, but it resulted in significant waste being diverted away from landfill. The pilots of mattress recycling, construction and demolition waste, and others are having a significant impact on waste reduction. The city continues to be a leader in waste reduction. The corporate waste reduction vision continues that leadership. The vision intends to decrease waste, reduce recycling contamination, and reduce single-use plastics, all honorable goals. However, the vision sets out no targets to indicate how much reduction council expects. The way the vision is documented, any reduction would be declared a success. However, staff have no way to know if they are actually meeting council's expectations. Council really must set some goal for reduction so that staff understands the level of effort that council would like committed to this initiative. It's only fair to staff that council's expectation for their vision be communicated. Without setting a goal, staff will have to struggle to guess what level of reduction council thinks is appropriate. If the city really wants to show leadership and to hold up our staff as role models for waste reduction, then the city's corporate contribution must be bold. The goal must be a stretch for staff to achieve the targets. The current vision calls for education, communication, and policies, but with no clear aim, just a general target of decrease. The city has set a clear reduction target for citizens, 70% by 2048, but the corporate vision has no specific target. I suggest that the city use this opportunity in this vision to turn staff into role models and to also learn what cultural changes are needed to achieve such a target. These learnings can be applied to citizens to help them achieve the same goals, perhaps before 2048. If the city cannot change waste management behavior in those who report to them, it's unlikely we will be successful in changing the behavior of citizens. I suggest that council set a stretch goal for the corporation. Achieve a 70% reduction in corporately generated waste by Q4 2023. To be successful, staff need to be held accountable, and waste must be measured on a regular basis to determine how well individual reduction strategies are performing. The progress of the reduction measures should be reported frequently to staff, internally, to encourage their participation, and to council quarterly to assure them that the target is being met, and as a demonstration to the public that the target is truly achievable. As the adage goes, that which is measured gets done. Setting a stretch goal such as reducing corporate waste by 70% would require significant policies to be developed and practices changed, in addition to the softer action of educating staff. For example, understanding the makeup of what is being disposed might inform purchasing policy changes to reduce packaging or to make suppliers and contractors more responsible for the waste that they contribute. Given a stretch goal like this, I'm sure staff, those committed to the reduction, will be challenged to come up with tactics which will guarantee success. Aside from being unfair to staff and making them guess council's expectations, setting no goal and missing an opportunity to advance reduction and to learn valuable change management lessons calls into question council's true commitment to reduction. So perhaps a council this afternoon, when the corporate waste reduction vision is presented, can put forward a motion to modify the corporate waste reduction vision to include setting an overall target of 70% reduction of corporately generated waste by Q4 2023, and that progress be reported to council quarterly. Of course, that's a very aggressive timeline, and so council may wish to discuss whether it's appropriate or maybe additional time be allowed, say 2024. As a general recommendation, I would suggest that council should always set targets for activities that they assign to and approve for staff, and that those activities always require measurement and a report back to council on progress. This is the best practice in governance, and to do otherwise risks failure and is not supportive of staff. Thank you. If you've got any questions or comments?
Thanks, Mr. Webb. Appreciate that. I'll just get a motion to receive your deputation. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Dunn, seconded by Deputy Mayor Richardson. Any questions for Mr. Webb on his deputation? Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Webb, and thank you for doing the work that you do there on this project here. Do you really think, I could sort of wrap it into one question, do you think that 70% is really achievable? And as far as the reports, how regular do you really think they should be? You mentioned quarterly, but would semi-annually be sufficient, or what is your thought on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so actually, I think 70% is absolutely achievable. I think there's no question. The time is maybe a little debatable. Things, we're partway through the year already. So, if you got the vision started by the end of the year, it only gives you a year to achieve 70%. So I think 70% is absolutely achievable. The timeline may be a bit too aggressive. But I think in order to achieve it, what you have to do is make sure that staff are accountable, and that it's not just environmental services who hold this in their department to make it so. So for example, managers should probably be held responsible for their area's waste and the reduction, and it should be written into their performance contracts to achieve that.
Okay.
Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, Mr. Webb, thank you very much for your presentation. It's certainly well thought out, and it's got some valuable ideas. My concern, I guess, may be that I'm not sure where we stand comparatively with other organizations in waste reduction, as in we very well could have over the last 4 or 5 years reduced already to such a point now that 70% is unachievable. I'm saying I simply don't know. And before I'd be able to support something like this, I would like to know where we stand in comparison to, like it's, if I can apply a diet to it, if I consume 5,000 calories a day and you only consume 1,000 calories a day, I can find 2,000 a lot easier than you can. And I just don't know where we stand. So can you give me some comments on that?
Yeah. So I think where I drew the 70% was from the target that we've set for citizens. Now, you're right, that target was set as 70% reduction from the waste that was going into landfill I'm not exactly certain the date, maybe 2018, something like that. There's probably no way to go back and establish what the baseline corporately generated waste contribution was. So perhaps 70% is too aggressive. What I would say is it should be 70% of whatever the corporately generated waste was, say, in 2018. I'm not sure whether environmental services would be able to provide any, more details on what corporately generated waste was when the 70% was set.
Thank you, sir. As usual, you always make me think. Have a good day.
Okay.
Mr. Webb, it's Andy here. I'm just wondering where did you come up with 2023 and the 70% by 2023? I know our advisory committee, the Waste Reduction Advisory Committee, recommended the policy that staff put forward. You're part of that committee, so I know you're doing this on your own, but I mean, where did you pull these numbers out of? I'm not seeing anything sort of supporting the timeline, supporting the reduction. Just, can you give me some background?
Well, so the reduction would be coming from the city's stance on 70% reduction by 2048, right? So citizens are expected to achieve that. 2023, I must say, I pulled out of a hat just to spark some debate. I agree that it's probably too aggressive, but if we don't set a target for staff, is it true that we really expect them just to decrease waste and not give them any sort of timeline or level? I don't think so. So you're right. The 70% was taken from the city's stance that we want to reduce by 70%. 2023 was just an aggressive target that I threw out there, hoping to spark debate.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Webb? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you, Mr. Webb, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we'll move down to our next deputation. Item 6.2 is the McEachern-Brown Municipal Drain, which is item 11.1.15 on the agenda. I believe Robert McEachern and Linda McEachern are both going to join us. There they are. Can you hear me okay, folks? Just need to take your mute off. There you go. Okay. You want to do a sound check for me? Make sure we can hear you?
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Just a reminder, you folks got 5 minutes, so please go ahead.
Okay, I want to start by thanking the Drainage Board for bringing this project forward to this level, and hopefully we can see it through and finished. This McEachern-Brown drain carries on from where the Eli Budd and the Hopkins ward drains started 120 years ago. And obviously after that period of time, drainage is no longer working like it did before. 40 years ago, when Eldon Township was doing things and they tried to fix the problem by putting a new culvert under the Palestine Road so the tile drains some of the ancestors had put in by hand would work again, they realized then that it was not adequate. It needed to be excavated to the south. And I just hope that this all goes through so that this part of our City of Kawartha Lakes drains and is productive, and we're able to farm here like we should be able to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just get a motion to receive, folks, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Vail, seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Any questions for Mr. and Mrs. McEachern? Seeing none, we have that report coming up later in our agenda, so sit tight. Thanks for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion. All in favor? And that's passed. Item 6.3 is an overview of the engineer's report for the McEachern-Brown Municipal Drain. Again, item 11.1.15 on the agenda. I think Ken Smith and Mark Hoare are going to join us from DM Wills. I see Ken there. Maybe it's just Ken, but a reminder, Ken, just 5 minutes if you don't mind. Go ahead, sir.
Very good. Thank you, councillors, and through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ken, here with DM Wills. I am the co-author and engineer for the report for the McEachern-Brown Drain. As a brief overview, you've heard from Mr. McEachern and Linda and Robert there that the drain is historical, 1904. It's the Eli Budd drain. We're talking about a 2.5 kilometer length of drain at the intersection of County Road 46 and Palestine Road. We were appointed as the drainage engineer through council resolution in October of 2019. We conducted our on-site meeting in the following summer, and we had the local residents that would be most impacted by the drain in the area that would be requiring improvements at that meeting. It did not envision inclusion of the entire potential watershed. So there were others that are eventually named in our report that were not, and it's due process to not have them in the very first meeting. We completed our work through the year of 2020. We met with the conservation authorities and conducted an additional floodplain study to address some special concerns on the ES&B farms. That's the Brown property. And that was conducted as a specialized report. Our engineering report was submitted in December 2020. We have held a meeting with the Drainage Board in January 2022, and we received a number of comments and questions through the process, fielded a number of calls, and the Drainage Board provided a recommendation to this council for us to move forward with the project, and we're here today to answer any questions as they arise.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll get a motion to receive. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Vail, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Any questions for Mr. Smith on the drainage report we have later in our agenda? Doesn't look like it. I think we've got it covered. So thank you again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? And that's passed. Okay, we'll go down to item 7, which is correspondence. We have 7.1 is future waste management options correspondence from Mr. David Webb. Motion to receive, please. Councillor Elmsley and Yo. Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. We have 7.2 is a request regarding the development of 30 Logie Street in Lindsay from Jane Chapman, the Chair of the Women's Resources of Kawartha Lakes. I've got a recommended motion here. If it works for council, let me read it. That the request for relief from certain city fees and charges from Women's Resources of Kawartha Lakes dated January 21st, 2022 be received, and that this request be referred to staff for review of applicable development charges, payment in lieu of parkland, planning application fees, and DAP fees with recommended and available relief reported back to council once the total fees and charges are determined through the associated site plan application. And we'll know exactly where we stand. Councillor Seymour Fagan, you'll move that. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll second that. Any questions? Councillor Ashmore?
This is an urgent build here. What would be the time frame? Because they want to get building and renovating right away.
Yeah, the urgent build was they needed the zoning, which we pushed through at the planning department to get them to get their grant. So now that when that goes through, then they need to submit a site plan. So I know Richard Hawley, our director, has been working with them really closely to get it done as quick as possible. This isn't as much a rush as the rezoning was, so they could get their application in for funding. But once we have the site plan, then we'll know, because it's a rebuild, so a rebuild of the existing. So it's once we know what the exact fees are, then council can make probably a better informed decision. So, all right. We have a mover and a seconder. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks. Item 7.3 is correspondence pertaining to item 14.1.1 on the agenda, the bylaw to amend bylaw 219-077, being a bylaw to repeal and replace bylaw 2009-116 as amended, being a bylaw to regulate their operation of ATVs and ORVs on municipal highways in the city of Kawartha Lakes. The additional correspondence came in from Kevin Frank, Derek Anderson, Doug Banks, Eric Davis, Don Harris, Carolyn Van Huften, and Jennifer Gilmer and Don Hughes. So if I can just get a motion to receive that correspondence, please. Councillor Elmsley and Dunn, all in favor? That's passed. Presentations, item 8. We got a presentation from CAO Ron Taylor regarding pandemic response and recovery update. I will turn it over to you, sir. Go ahead.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, thanks for the opportunity. Wanted to provide you sort of our rounding out, I would like to say, update on the city's pandemic response. Not so much on the recovery side. I'm quite optimistic at this point that we're really heading into a new phase of things. But I think it's important. There's been some directives from the province recently that are applicable that will have some ripple effect and change in our service. So I'm just going to walk you very briefly through a couple of presentation slides. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this is actually an iteration of something that you've seen, but it really is showing the timeline of the pandemic response over the 2 years and some of the major milestones that we've all collectively sort of worked through. I'm not going to go through each one individually, but I can tell you that almost to the day today was when the declared emergencies occurred provincially and locally 2 years ago. So we're fully in 2 years in terms of a response to this pandemic. At the tail end of that graphic really talks about some of the recent changes. So the province is looking to the end of April to withdraw all remaining directives under the Reopening Act. There's been some changes already this month, and there will be a couple more even up to the end of March as well. So if we go to the next slide, when I do these overviews, whether it's staff or just in general communication updates, always good to have sort of the context broadly. So we talk about it from a provincial standpoint, where we're going, from our community. Even the reporting from the health unit is going to be changing. The frequency of communications is going to be pulled back. There still will be obviously monitoring directions and certain sort of data and stats to manage it more locally or really regionally, because the health unit covers multiple areas. But overall, and this has been sort of a standard trend for about the last month of reporting from the health unit, transmission continues to decrease. Case management in our health unit remains very manageable. That's through the health unit and our health partners as well. The positivity rate is declining and has been steadily declining week over week now, getting back to almost not quite pre-pandemic, but certainly other wave positivity rates. And since January 1st, so in the Omicron wave phase of this pandemic, those are some of the stats just with respect to hospitalizations, IC admissions, and deaths as a result of COVID. So if we go to the next slide, please. One thing I do want to, and I've been sort of reporting through you in our weekly communications, I really sort of look at this sort of last couple of weeks and probably to the end of April as very much a transitionary or transition period or phase, where we're certainly sort of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, coming out of what I would term the response phase, but we're not quite out, and we're starting to look at the recovery and sort of how we do services ongoing. And so this is a stat that it really just effective from beginning of the year, and it looks at our staffing. And based on either directives and screening and or positive tests, there's a significant number of staff that have been pulled out of the workplace for what is thankfully shorter periods of time, but that hasn't gone away yet. So this is a stat up to mid-March, where we've seen over 1,500 staff days affected, and you can see some of the stats with respect to the ability to work around or work offline versus entirely sort of isolated from the workplace. And I think it's an important one because it hasn't changed this week. There still are positive cases that we've been seeing weekly, last week inclusive, as well as screening. So we're probably averaging 50 to 100 per week lost work days collectively with staff. But having said all of that, we've been able to manage and maintain all of our service levels where they're at currently. We've had to do some shifting and moving around, and I will say that these numbers are dramatically improving from what was reported in February. So if we go to the next slide, please. So talking about the provincial reopening plan, so we're in the final phase of that. It actually expires at the end of March, and the government has extended it for 30 days, just based on the directives that were put in place. But when they revised the reopening plan or phases, there was certain restrictions that were lifted. So March 1st was a milestone date. I reported to you previously, at least through communications. All capacity limits for indoor settings were lifted and removed. Proof of vaccination requirements were lifted in all settings under that particular act, effective March 1st. Some employers or high-risk health settings were then tasked with creating their own or continuing on with similar directives and policies, but from an employer perspective. Most mask mandates were lifted. There are some that remain in healthcare, congregate setting, care settings, in our transit system, and where established in employer health and safety policies. So as I mentioned, some are still going to extend beyond those current dates in certain settings for many reasons. And April 27th is the provincial target date for removal of all remaining provincial measures, directives, and orders under this reopening plan. And we are anticipating there may be some ministries that impose directives or requirements in certain settings where they have jurisdiction. So it's very likely that particularly through the Ministry of Health and or the Ministry of Long-Term Care, that they will impose sort of new directions or extended directives for a transitionary period of time. So for us, that would affect, in particular, Victoria Manor, our long-term care home, and I'm not anticipating much more beyond the end of April in other service areas. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we have been slowly and steadily reopening or expanding on reopening of services and that footprint. So we've been extending it beyond to mainly pre-pandemic levels. So most services are already open, if not all, but modified, some significantly, some very minor. And we're going to just continue on now to expand those services as we start to revisit demand, as we start to bring staff back online sort of more fully. And again, it's a balancing act. We want to make sure that we're balancing those staffing resources, our service demands. So we're not really seeing the sort of, as we open the doors, all of a sudden pre-pandemic demand either. So we want to do it properly. We want to do it slow and steady, but we also want to make sure that we're accessible. And while we transition over the next couple of months, some of those baseline health and safety sort of practices and measures will still be in place. There is some limited masking that's still required over certainly currently and probably into the next month. Some of our staff, dependent on the service area, there's specialized PPE that's required anyways. We're going to continue on with cleaning, sanitizing of public facilities in our workplaces, and just some of the existing barriers that remain in place. From a service reopening perspective, again, most are reopening, or we're certainly in the readying stage for our normal spring openings of various things. So we're prepping our parks, prepping our community services amenities that are out there, public washrooms that are out there. They are all planned to be opened as normal in springtime. We have 2 active service centers that are open right now, being Coboconk and Lindsay, and we will be opening the Omimi Service Center the week of April 5th. It'll actually be April 5th because they're going to be open part-time on a Tuesday, Thursday basis there. Public washrooms in service centers, we're going to open to the public again for access as well when those facilities are open. So there'll be another amenity for the public to use. And we will, in the very immediate term, our administration spaces sort of generally remain closed, and we're now looking at sort of the next phase, reopening certain spaces where it makes sense, and or looking at appointment-based sort of interactions. In fact, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that in detail at the April 5th Committee of the Whole meeting, where I want to bring forward a separate report that's looking more at service changes post-pandemic as we move forward. So if we go to the next slide, please. Top of mind in the news, certainly that's been talked about, and really based on the, as of yesterday, the directive from the province to remove the requirement for mandatory vaccination in certain settings. That we've followed that and we've implemented that as well where it makes sense. These are our vaccination rates with staff. And we're not sort of tracking whether it's public access into spaces. We're not tracking vaccination status anymore. We haven't been doing that actually for a couple of weeks. And that will be the same for our staff in general spaces. There is still a mandatory vaccination policy and requirement for employees in our long-term care facility. And that's in alignment with sort of the directions that we're getting from the Ministry of Health and that sort of space in general. Next slide, please. So just to sort of wrap up the update, Mr. Mayor, happy to answer any questions. This topic of service transformation and reset is really what I'm going to be reporting on in a couple of weeks, where we're starting to look ahead at transforming how we do service, and really looking at it through three major sort of theme areas. And this is going to be extensive, I'll say, sort of right across the organization, where we really want to look at ourselves, look at lessons learned through the pandemic, look at it through the customer's lens as well, in terms of how we can better that service experience. But we want to look at it through a technology lens. We want to look at it through overall sort of public service and our physical workspaces, whether they're indoor spaces, office spaces, but even external spaces as well. And again, make sure that we're being responsive to the customer. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to conclude that we're going to continue to expand service. We'll continue to do it slow and steady. Certainly appreciate Council's support in that throughout the entirety of this pandemic, and sort of your insights and direction on sort of where we should be at these various stages. And again, wanting to make sure that we're responsive to your constituents and to all the residents and businesses that are out there. So I think with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll conclude, and if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just get a motion to receive. Councillor Dunn, you'll receive. Councillor Yeo, you'll second it. And Councillor Dunn, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question on the mandatory vaccinations. So we've now, and specifically with our long-term care, we've now moved from being required by, and this is a question, I'm sort of making a statement, but it's a question. We've now moved from being required by the province to have our workers vaccinated to, we now have the opportunity to make our own choice. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do we have any idea when that mandate, if ever, may be lifted? And I'll just give you the background. I've received a call from a worker at Victoria Manor that has been advised she's required to receive her booster shot. She's had 1 and 2, but now she's required to receive her booster shot. She has some concerns, and I said, I'm not sure where the policy is. Do we have any idea when those workers may get relief from the mandatory part of it, and how do we compare to other providers of long-term care?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So as of yesterday, we had an employer policy, and that was directed that all employers should have a policy with respect to vaccination. And we've been pulling back as the health directives have occurred. So as of yesterday, now all sort of, I call it non-essential, or maybe high risk or low risk settings is a better term. There's no longer a requirement for vaccination, and we're not tracking that as well, the status. For our paramedic service, there was some additional requirements prior to yesterday that they were required to be have mandatory vaccination, and similar for long-term care. Our definition in the employer's policy is 2 vaccinations, and that's in alignment with provincial as well as federal health direction. So that's the requirement. But as of yesterday, paramedics were no longer required to have mandatory vaccination either. They are subject to daily rapid testing or rapid testing prior to entry into the workplace. The only service area remaining city-wise is our Victoria Manor long-term care. And as the employer, we opted to continue to require mandatory vaccination. That's defined as 2 doses. And those staff are on leave, unpaid leave, but it's under the sort of emergency act in the legislation. So going to your last question, which is how do we compare? We're certainly absolutely comparative with whether it's municipal homes or not-for-profit or private homes. My understanding is the vast majority continue to have mandatory vaccination requirements. I would say as an employer, we're probably much more lenient in a sense that many opted to terminate employees that didn't meet the policy months ago. We didn't opt to do that. So they still have status with the city, and we'll recall them when that policy changes or is updated. And I'm anticipating that that's going to be in place probably till at least the end of April. And as I mentioned before, we're expecting the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care to provide further guidance to employers.
Thank you.
So just for clarity, good question. So 2 shots is considered fully vaccinated. Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to the CAO. Similar to the last question, I just want to get some clarification. When you said the province would be lifting the vaccination requirement for, I'll give you an example, the Victoria Manor employees, is that the date, the end of, according to the province, the end of April? Would we be following that? That they would no longer be, due to their personal health choice, be brought back in as full-time employees at that date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so just for clarity, as of yesterday, the province removed the requirement for mandatory vaccinations in any settings. So as of yesterday, we as the employer updated our vaccination policy that we had and minimized sort of what the requirements were, and based on the directives either today and then the best practices in particularly in long-term care. And obviously it's a unique setting where we have very vulnerable residents, and so we've opted as an employer to continue to require at this time mandatory vaccination of staff in our home. What we're anticipating is that, separate and distinct from the directives that were in place through the Reopening Act generally, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care are now reviewing and will likely provide guidance to homes or operators in terms of what we should do moving forward in our for vaccinations. And we'll queue off of that. So there's no set time limit. I'm just anticipating that before the end of April, we'll have good guidance from those respective ministries.
Okay, thanks. My second question is transit. I can never figure this one out. If you could sort of help me with this, with transit. The mask mandates were dropped. Does that apply to the municipality for for users? And I had another quick question after that. So the transit, what is the status on that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so again, as of yesterday, a significant number of masking requirements were removed or lifted by the province, but not entirely. So there are some areas where masking is still required, and they were explicit sort of in that language that one of the areas is transit systems. And so we are following that directive. That directive falls under that Reopening Act that I described, and that's the act that the province has extended beyond to the end of April. So I'm anticipating that that requirement for masking in transit or high congregate settings is going to remain in place, but will be removed by the end of April.
The end of April, okay. One more thing, which is kind of really perplexing, is as we get into the higher levels of government, take for example the GO station in Oshawa. There's a GO station and there's right beside it, it's on Stevenson Road, everybody knows where it is, on the 401, a new GO station and the Via Rail. The Via Rail passengers have to be vaccine mandated and have to be masked, And at the same building on the other side, you don't have to have a vaccine mandate or a mask to go on the GO train. So it's so confusing. I think that's morphing into something beyond us, but that's a federal issue that's complicating it. So, but we're basically what I'm asking is we're taking our directions from the provincial government, which is different from what the federal government is right now because they haven't changed a thing. So we are changing, but the final change would be April 20th or April 27th or whatever, April 30th.
So again, through you, and thanks for the question. I guess number one, I'm glad I'm not in Oshawa and have those that sort of different sort of jurisdictions to handle or deal with. But certainly, we're following the provincial guidelines. It is explicit right now that masking remains a requirement in local transit systems, and that's why it's being imposed accordingly. Again, I'm anticipating that if nothing changes provincially, and the province has said this, that they will then not continue on with the directions under the Reopening Act beyond the end of April. So assuming that everything sort of moves in the direction it's going, I'm assuming we would remove then the requirement on our local transit system.
Okay, Councillor Vail, go ahead.
Thank you. Just for clarification, so based on the changes and everything else, if a resident wanted to set up an in-person meeting with somebody in the planning department to deal with their file, that is all right, or that's on a go at this point. Is that my understanding?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was really in place even prior to yesterday, in a sense that you can make an appointment. It's really more the venue or how, but we are looking at, and we have had in various phases of the pandemic, the opportunity to make an appointment, set up a meeting, and we've got dedicated meeting spaces to have those planning meetings in this example with proponents. So yes.
Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Yes, thank you, through you, to the CAO. Now, I'm on the Board of Management for Victoria Manor, and we had a meeting on Monday, and I don't know if you've been updated on the outcome of this. There was a vote by the board to enforce mandatory vaccination on the employees who are not fully vaccinated at this point. I had an issue with that because I was concerned that we would be losing staff because we already have a shortage. And I asked if we could do testing, but the other members of the board voted to enforce the mandatory vaccination on the employees. We were also not told that 3 shots are the mandatory vaccination. So I'm not quite sure why we weren't told that. That wasn't even part of the discussion. We were told the 2. So I don't know what's happening there, but I do know that as of the decision of the Board of Management on Monday, that my concern for the people who will not have a position at Victoria Manor was confirmed. So I don't know if we can change this as a council or you as CAO, because these people are now without a job as far as
I don't think the policy's changed at Victoria Manor, but go ahead.
So through you, so thanks for the question. I am aware of the meeting at least and the discussion. The intent was really more to inform the Board of Management of the decision that, or the extended requirement for mandatory vaccination in the long-term care home. So it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't an approval. It was really that management board, it was a support resolution because we already do have now, as of that same day, the employer's policy in place. And to the mayor's comments, nothing has changed in terms of what is required from even our previous iteration. It's just that the province had directed it up to a certain timeline, and now as the employer or the home operator, we're continuing that along. The good news is that, and again, I certainly, there's a staffing issue there fundamentally, and certainly we want to bring our people back, but we're trying to also balance sort of as a service provider in that area, making sure that we're following what's required from a health perspective. So there's not new staff that are affected by it, I guess, number one. The definition in our employer policy is 2 vaccinations. I think what staff were likely conveying to you is the conversations that are happening at the ministries, where they may be, as well as saying we should extend requirements for vaccination, that the definition from a ministry standpoint could change. But as of today, it's 2 vaccinations, and we're enforcing it accordingly, or implementing it that way.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess there was confusion because I did ask what would happen to those people, and, you know, it was conveyed to me that they wouldn't have a position. The people who are not fully vaccinated would not have a position within the city. They're currently on, I think you said a leave, and they are able to access some kind of EI at this point. I did ask about that. You know, the concern is for employees who've been there for many, many years, and they're choosing some, with, you know, for their own body, it's their own choice, and they're not allowed to work at this point. So that was my concern. So are you saying that they are not being let go because they have chosen not to be vaccinated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I'm saying that they continue to be on unpaid leave under that sort of emergency clause, and I apologize, I can't remember the legislation name, but so they still have status with the city. They would be recalled if that policy changes, and that the policy that's in place today is exactly the same as what it was a week ago or for many months in long-term care.
Okay, thank you, because I don't think that was the conversation that was being had at long-term care. So I appreciate the clarity on that. I really do. Thank you.
I think we need to show concern for our vulnerable residents as well, not just the employers that choose not to be vaccinated. So you're right, it's their body, it's their choice, but they're also working in a very high-risk setting, and let's make that part of the conversation as well.
Actually, it was, just so you know, it was because I asked for mandatory testing, if that would be acceptable, because other homes do that, and they said that it could be, but it wasn't part of our conversation.
Good.
So I did ask.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. Just a question through you to CAO. Regarding EMS, just a question, because different municipalities have different rules. So we're dealing with, I know, a small group of employees, but they're very important. And for example, Halliburton has different rules than we do in accommodating these people. And also, but also what complicates the thing is the hospital, our hospital here, our local hospital, and the group that they belong to, about a group of 6 or 7 hospitals, they have now gone off and set their own rules. So what is the most difficult thing for these employees? Are they dealing with the municipality has different rules, or is it the local hospital that are basically not following the science now? They're setting their own rules for those employees to enter their premises.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so what has never changed and remains today is that any employers can set what policies they think are reasonable and necessary. And, you know, I don't want to debate in terms of what's right or what's wrong or everything in between, but certainly, you know, what we're seeing is high-risk settings, hospitals, long-term care facilities, high sort of congregate settings in retirement homes, places like that, regardless of the debate on vaccinations and effectiveness, are maintaining those mandatory policies predominantly for their people. And we just talked about Victoria Manor. With respect to EMS services in the province, it's similar. You know, employers have chosen, for whatever reasons, I would assume all comply with the baseline provincial requirements, but then they're sort of establishing their own employer policies. We were no different. We chose to sort of lean on the advice of health, local and provincial, and we made it mandatory as a requirement in that service up until yesterday. And so when we changed our policy yesterday to not require mandatory vaccine of paramedics, but we did impose a requirement for testing so that we could assure those other settings that they're going into that that they are tested and that they are, it's a negative test. And so we, as the employer, need to ensure that that is there as we're going into these other settings. And that's essentially what other services have done over the period of time. But as of yesterday, those employees subject to a test are able to return to the workplace.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you for that. We'll move over to item 9, Committee of the Whole. Recommendations. I have no correspondence regarding Committee of the Whole recommendations. I have for extractions, Committee of the Whole, I have 9.3.16, which is the Ops Community Center update extracted by Councillor Ashmore. I have 9.3.17, the outdoor rink surfaces extracted by Councillor Dunn. And I have 9.3.27, the update to the ATV pilot program specific to monitoring and enforcement extracted by Councillor Dunn. Are there any other extractions from Committee of the Whole? Seeing none, can I get a motion that the minutes of the March 8th, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting be received and the recommendations included in section 9.3, save and accept 9.3.16, 9.3.17, and 9.3.27 be adopted? Moved by Councillor Yeo, second by Councillor Vale. All in favor? That's passed. First extraction is 9.3.16 is the Ops Community Center update. Councillor Ashmore, your extraction. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. For this one here, I'll have no motion on it, please, Mr. Mayor.
No motion?
Just to receive it.
So a motion that the Ops Community Center update be received?
Yes.
Moved by Councillor Ashmore, second by Councillor Yeo. All in favor? That's passed to receive. Is there any follow-up motion for the rest of the motion? Councillor O'Reilly?
With the rest of the motion?
As printed?
Yes, printed.
That 300,000 be included in the 2023 capital budget deliberation to demolish the Ops Community Center?
Yes.
Moved by Councillor O'Reilly, second by Councillor Helmsley. Thank you. Do you want to speak to it?
Yes, just briefly. I spoke to it at Committee of the Whole, and basically nothing has changed. The community, they came forward with a report from staff. Staff spoke to it at the Committee of the Whole, and the recommendation from the Committee of the Whole was that basically there was, in their opinion, there wasn't, it was not very prudent to put good money behind an old building, and they felt as though the new building should be replaced. And I support it. I talked to members of the community, Dennis Callahan in particular, who's one of the committee members. I think at some point he was probably a little disappointed that they didn't have more conversations around the uses, but overall he supported the fact that it didn't make sense putting good money behind bad money. And so I said there's going to be an opportunity as a result of all the new growth. They said there's probably, I think, between 5,000 and 10,000 homes that are going to be built with less than 5 kilometers. One of the developers, Flato, has already indicated that he was prepared to put some money into a new community center. So I think the next council, I think, is going to have the opportunity to decide what the biggest and best use for that facility is. And I think when I was growing up, we had old arenas, and in the 70s we all got to build new arenas, whether it was Ops, Little Britain, Oakwood, Manburs, all the other places. So I think the people in that catchment area will have an opportunity to get a new facility, and I would certainly be willing, even though I'm not on council, to be part of that committee on conversation.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley, you're good. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you. I'll speak against the motion. Just yesterday, it was announced that the Autonomy Arena near Keene received a $1.5 million grant. So I found that kind of interesting, because we were told a couple of years ago that we lost out on the funding opportunity, but lo and behold, there are other communities, and I'm very happy for them that they got this grant. But I found that quite, perplexing, that we didn't try to get at that grant, because we did vote to save this facility as a council. It was voted to save this facility and keep it standing. But anyways, I just thought I'd mention that, and if I could ask for a recorded vote, please.
Okay, recorded vote requested by Councillor Ashmore. Any further comments or questions? Let me get you to sum up. Let me see if anyone else wants to. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think this council made this as our #1 priority for the infrastructure project, and we asked the federal and provincial government to give us money to build a new ops arena. So we certainly did make it a priority, and I believe our local member of parliament said that their funding wasn't available, and I know I saw that same thing on the Councillor Ashmore. Others, Camelford got a new arena as well too, so, but we weren't fortunate enough to get those funds.
Thank you. Recorded vote. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Councillor Ashmore?
Opposed?
Councillor Dunn?
In favor.
Councillor Vale?
In favor.
Councillor O'Reilly?
In favor.
Councillor Seymour Fagan?
In favor.
Councillor Yeo?
In favor.
Councillor Elmsley? In favor. Deputy Mayor Richardson?
In favor.
Mayor Latham?
In favor. 8-1 in favor, motion passes. Thank you. 9317 is the next extraction, outdoor rink surfaces. Councillor Dunn, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll give you the motion to receive and refer back to staff to identify further options and return with a report by the end of Q3. And if I get a seconder, I'll explain my motion.
Thank you. Anyone? Councillor O'Reilly will second. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we had a great meeting with Mr. Irvine and Director Shanks. They exchanged ideas. Mr. Irving's request wasn't quite as full-throated as the one we received the report on. We have a good understanding of where we want to go, and Director Shanks will look for options to see whether or not we can do it. He'll give us prices, and if in fact it moves ahead, Mr. Irwin will probably try to find some outside funding and a service group to work with to do some joint funding. But it's a brand new world, and I think they've got it figured out now, and we just have to wait for the report.
Thank you. You're good? Any questions on that? Comments? Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you for following up on that. Next extraction is 9327, the update to the ATV pilot program specific to monitoring and enforcement. Councillor Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll give you the motion to receive and then provide comments, and hopefully we can clear up some emails that we've received and move forward.
Yeah, you want to comment on some of the safety, which isn't really relevant to this report, but we're going to allow it just for clarification on the whole issue. So we have a mover for that report, RD 2022-001, update to the ATV pilot program specific to monitoring enforcement be received. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second by Deputy Mayor Richardson. Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, somehow comments made at the task force were misunderstood. We made a commitment to ensure that that this program could be implemented safely. There was never any comments about an independent assessment done by an outside body. I mean, those comments simply were not made. We've done everything at the task force level and at the council level, quite frankly, to ensure this program can be implemented safely. And I'll give you a couple of highlights. At the start, the feeling of the task force was to open up all rural roads, and if a road proved unsafe, that they were going to be advised by Public Works, and we would rectify those questions. Public Works requested that we identify specific roads, which we did, and of the roads that we identified, they came up with no specific safety concerns. Coming through the town of Lindsay, we got the Police Services Board. One of the members, or not the Police Services Board, but the Police Service involved, one of the members which sits on our committee, they specifically requested that Kent Street and Angeline Street South not be included in any ATV routes. And we said, sure, that's fine, that we acceded to their requests. Yourself and Councillor Emsley had concerns because of construction coming up on Colburn Street at Angeline Street, with running it up Colburn Street, and we moved it from Colburn Street up to Elgin Street to resolve that safety concern. Every route, every crossing is a protected crossing, with the exception of it's not a four-way stop at Elgin and Adelaide Street, and it's not a four-way stop at Elgin and Angeline Street, but the traffic flow is the right way to allow for safety. Every other intersection is a protected intersection. Then when we move further north, we once again address safety concerns. Councillor Yeo brought up the issue of the Long Beach Road from Ranchers Road down to Long Beach, that it be excluded. Once again, council made the decision at this point to remove that from the task force recommendations. When the crossing at Country Road was discussed, when the crossing at Cameron itself was discussed, these were all safety issues that were identified to the task force and to council, because it was a council decision at this point, and for safety concerns they were removed. The province over the last 30+ years, under controlled circumstances, has permitted operations of ATVs on roads, that you wear a helmet, that you travel at 20 kilometers an hour, or in areas where the speed limit is in excess of 50 kilometers an hour at 50% of the posted speed limit. It's shown by track records that, in fact, if people operate according to the law, they can operate these vehicles safely. In Finland Falls, we have 18 years, and I'm not going to suggest for a second that some of the people that live on the route are happy about ATVs going by their house, but we've had 18 years of no incident. This is a pilot program. That's all it is. It's a pilot program to see if it can work. We will certainly identify issues that appear over the next year, and we can address those issues. But it's a pilot program, and I just wanted to get that out there to answer some of the questions that have been raised, and it's a received motion. Thank you. And I'll answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you for that. Councillor Elmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to be crystal clear, and I know we've all received phone calls and we've all received emails about the routes through Lindsay and the opposition. And in those emails and phone calls, it has been alluded to the fact that during the deliberations of the task force, it was stated that there would be a safety assessment done before it came forward to be approved. So I'd ask Councillor Dunn if he would care to comment on the notion that people have that during the deliberations, and they say that it is evident on the video they have, that it was stated that a safety assessment would be done.
I think he just addressed it, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
And I can touch on that. The task force did a safety assessment. We assessed every issue that was brought forward. So, and I'll just give you a couple more quick examples. Pontypool and the Mount Orb Road, on both of those occasions, and actually on Mount Orb Road down by Omimi, on all three of those occasions, the issue was raised that it was a safety concern that if we ran it right straight through to 7 and right straight through to 35, that people would read into that they're allowed to travel on the highways. So we moved the zone back 100 yards in both occasions. Every single safety concern that has been brought to the task force and subsequently to council, to the best of my knowledge, has been answered. So we did an assessment, but the assessment we agreed to do and that we committed to do was not to hire an outside firm and come in at X numbers of thousands of dollars to do an assessment on our behalf. We did our own assessment. We provided a program that we thought was safe. I still believe that. If everybody does what they're supposed to do, we should have no issues.
Thank you. Follow-up to that is, once this pilot is in place, should there be violations to what has been set up? Should there be ATVers who don't follow the process, don't follow the prescribed routes, don't obey the speed limits, don't obey the traffic rules. And these are noted and documented and brought back to council. Would you, as the chair of the ORV task force, bring those forward and suggest that we need to relook at this pilot project to the point that it could be done away with?
So I'll answer that one if I can, Councillor. So that's why we put in place to monitor it after a year, that a report, the ORTV task force has been dissolved, so Councillor Dunn's responsibilities in that regard are no longer. So that monitoring report will come back to this council, and if there's any issues that we need to identify as a council, that will be our opportunity to make adjustments if needed.
Thank you, and I did know that the ORV task force was disbanded, but I wasn't sure how it would come back, and so I apologize to Councillor Dunn for putting him on the spot. But just so we get the information out there that this is a pilot project and that there is an opportunity, if things don't go well, that this can be revisited and we can look at other alternatives or indeed outright cancellation of this privilege.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we put the monitoring enforcement that's in this report, so that we can track it as it goes and see how it rolls out as part of a pilot project that Councillor Dunn keeps referring to. Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Just a quick, not to belabor the point, but I think one of the other questions that many of the people asked, the route going through, we'll say, Lindsay, and if you're 2 or 3, 4 blocks away from the route, is it clear that you're not allowed to get on the route, you're not to drive to the route within the urban area?
It is clear. It is clear in the bylaw that these are the approved routes, not the roads leading up to those routes, but those routes are the only routes ATVs are allowed on.
That's what I thought, but that was asked. Okay.
Any other questions on this motion to receive? Good. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. Okay, that's our committee of the whole. Let's go over to planning. Any extractions from the planning report? Planning reports that came forward were all approved at planning. Seeing none. Councillor Vail, you move the, hold it, let me do correspondence regarding planning advisory committee recommendations. We have none. I need that the minutes of the March 9th, 2022 Planning Advisory Committee meeting be received and the recommendations included in section 10.3 of the agenda be adopted. Moved by Councillor Vail, second by Councillor O'Reilly. Any questions, comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. We'll go right over to our consent agenda. Let me, Councillor Dunn, I believe you have that. Extractions from the consent agenda I have are 11.1.1, the status of outstanding council resolutions and timelines has been extracted by Councillor Dunn. And report council remuneration 2023 to 2026 has been extracted by Councillor Elmsley. Any other extractions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll give you a motion as printed, and if I get a seconder, it's just a quick question that I need to ask.
I need the resolutions first for the rest of the consent
sorry,
matters.
yes,
Yep.
absolutely. Okay. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Elmsley, that the proposed resolutions shown in section 11.1 of the agenda be approved and adopted in the order that they appear on the agenda and sequentially numbered, save and except items 11.11 and 11.15.
Perfect, thank you. All in favor? That's passed. And our first extraction is 11.11, status of outstanding council resolutions and timelines. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just noticed that some of those reports and resolutions, specifically the crosswalk at Victoria Avenue and the second one, I think, at William Street, have already been approved. They're in the budget. Do we still need to get a report back on them, or can we just sort of stroke those off the list?
CEO, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if it was on the list and it's been delivered upon, then we'll take it off the list. I appreciate you flagging that. That's
Thank
great.
you.
That's one less to do.
That's it? Can I get the motion as printed? You'll move that then? To be that status of outstanding council resolutions and timelines be received. And that council approve the revised timing for reporting back on various matters as directed through council resolutions as outlined in Appendix A to this report. Moved by Councillor Dunn, second. Councillor Yeo, thank you. Any questions? All in favor? And that's passed. Next extraction is 1115, council remuneration 2023 to 2026, the next term of council. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems that we can't get away from this, that no matter what we do, it comes down to us about what the remuneration for council is. It would be nice if there was a third party who dictated it, but unfortunately there's not. And of course, whenever we do something, we will be criticized for it because it's a salary and it's council. However, we did make a move some years back to tie the council remuneration to the consumer price index. And that was after council had been in place for 8 years and there had been no change in salary for that 8 years. And we chose at that time to use the consumer price index because what it did was keep the purchasing power of the salaries for council at the same level regardless of what happened, so that as long as you stuck to the consumer price index, you were going to have the same purchasing power in 2015 that you would have had in 2001, even though the salary would have been different. When we come to the choices we are given here of option 1, 2, or 3, I think that the best option is option 3, but I think that I would look for a change that we do the greater of 2% or the consumer price index, whichever is lower. And I would make the motion to receive this report and to take option 3 with the slight change that we opt for either 2% or the consumer price index, whichever is lower in that year. And if I get a seconder, I won't have to talk to it because I already did.
So just for clarity, that council salaries be established as the lower of 2% annually or CPI, effective the next term of council 2023 to 2026, and that the necessary bylaws be forwarded to council for approval. Okay? Moved by Councillor Elmsley. Anybody want to second that? Councillor Dunn, discussion? You've already spoke to it. Do you want to speak to it?
Well, I agree with Councillor Elmsley. No matter what you do, you're wrong. This is a compromise because I would suggest that in 2022, the consumer price index is going to be dramatically higher than what it normally is, it's fine. And I guess that's the best, you know, it does give a different option, and it does give it does compensate for those big inflationary booms that I think we're going to be seeing for the next several years.
Yes, Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you, yeah. I'll speak against the motion for a couple of reasons. I think it should have been kept at 1%. When we look at this particular position that we're paid for, we work to get elected, and we do our job for the 4 years that we're here. I know that I didn't go in this job asking for raises every year. I know that it's not a raise per se, but it's still a raise. And this is what infuriates people when we spend time on this here. Me personally, it's fine the way it is, even without a raise. I'm fortunate that I have this job for now. Anyways, for how long, I don't know, but it's a position that a lot of other people would say, you know, they don't even have a job, or they lost a job in the last 2 years. I mean, we should look at ourselves here too. Like most of us here, if not all of us, half of us have another business or another job, and the other half have an income that's supplemented through a pension. So we don't rely on this salary as our full-time to compensate for full-time employment, our income. That's not our full-time income, none of us. And I think that when we keep doing this here, it just kind of irks people, like that we're going to be tying it to inflation, which is totally out of control right now. But I'm going to speak against the motion, sorry, but right now, because I think it's a bit too high for right now.
Okay, so just, no, and I'm certainly not disagreeing with you. I just, for clarity, we're tying it to inflate. I'm going to speak against it too, and only because I just think it's you're complicating what should just be a simple process. Do the 1 or 2%, and you know the lesser of. I don't know. I don't understand what we're trying to say there, but just for clarity, Councillor Ashmore, it's the lesser of 2% or the CPI. So the CPI last year was 4.8%. So it wouldn't be 4.8, it would be 2 in that case. If the CPI was 1%, then it would be 1% and not the 2%. It's the lesser of the two. So only once in the last 5 years has it been below 2%. So that's what the councillor's proposing. So the lesser, it wouldn't be more than 2% on any given year over the next 4 years. So, and that's for the next term of council, obviously. So any other questions or comments on the motion? Councillor O'Reilly?
Oh, thank you. I'm going to speak in favor of, because I think that there's two things that play here. First of all, I think the job is a lot bigger than people realize. I know they're open for criticism for it, but we all have 10,000 constituents now. It's a very big job if you want to do your job and do it properly. And I think that if we are to look forward to going forward to attracting people that are going to perhaps make it a full-time job, I think it should be a job that pays a decent salary. We're not talking about a huge swing, but I'm going to speak in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else? Recorded vote requested by Councillor Ashmore. Do you want to sum up, Councillor Elmsley?
Oh, I think you stated it correctly, that it's never going to be higher than 2%, and I think that's fair. And I agree with Councillor O'Reilly's statements. So I think the compromise is the best effort we can make towards fairness to all parties.
Thank you. Recorded vote requested by Councillor Ashmore. Madam Clerk?
Councillor Yeo?
Opposed.
Opposed. Councillor O'Reilly?
In favor?
Councillor Vale?
In favor.
Councillor Dunn?
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Richardson?
In favor.
Councillor Ashmore?
Opposed?
Councillor Elmsley? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
In favor.
Mayor Letham?
In favor. 7-2 in favor, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we'll move over to, we'll just keep going here a little bit. We'll move over to a couple of, one item extracted from consent is a water wastewater mandatory connection bylaw review, presentation and discussion. So let's do that, and then we'll do bylaws and take a break before closed session. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Let's dial up whether it's Brian. Mr. Robinson, are you there? There you are, Brian. Okay, you're up for your presentation on 11.2.1, the water wastewater mandatory connection bylaw presentation. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Everybody can hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I just wanted to take the opportunity today to walk through the mandatory connection bylaw history of and some specifics so council has opportunity to be fully aware of the requests and further discussion on the on mandatory connection from the coalition submission from the lawyer. So next slide, presentation overview. I'm going to go through very quickly the benefits of municipal servicing, discussion of the history of the mandatory connection bylaw within the city of Kawartha Lakes from its inception through to 2014, bylaw comparison with other municipalities in Ontario, where ours compares in rates. I'm going to slide through that fairly quick. Discussion of the Finland Falls pilot project. And then through 2017 to 2019, there was a number of amendments that council made to the mandatory connection bylaw. We'll go over those, talk about the financial impacts of the requested bylaw amendments, and then just a general summary, and then open up to questions. So next slide is the benefits of municipal water servicing. So again, properties that qualify for the connection have existing access to existing water or wastewater infrastructure, receive a number of kind of ancillary benefits from that infrastructure being there. So again, increased property values by having access to a sustained municipal water or wastewater source. Municipal water sources through legislation are less susceptible to contamination, drought. So we have seen in the past where there's been a number of concerns with respect to the water table due to extended droughts. As well as interference from nearby development. So it's a more sustainable long-term water source due to the source protection legislation. We have reserve capacity commitments for those properties to connect to municipal services at any time. Again, a guaranteed safe drinking water source, as well as properties that are within fire-rated communities do receive typical reductions to insurance premiums. And I do note that that's not all properties receiving that. There's only a few communities within our systems that are fire rated. So next slide. The benefits of the mandatory connection bylaw from a municipal perspective ensures that residents are provided safe drinking water. Again, that is the goal of every municipality that operates and runs drinking water systems. Ensures sustainability of our water and wastewater systems by ensuring proper recovery through user rate fees, ensures that new development within service areas are connected to municipal infrastructure. So as new developments coming forward, ensuring that those are tied through to that system, in line with a provincial policy statement for under the Planning Act. It reinforces the city's strategic priorities. So the key ones being good government, healthy environment, a vibrant and growing community. So again, it reinforces and aligns with those values and those strategic priorities. Ensures fairness to all those who benefit from the system. And again, it aligns with and is supported by the Municipal Act. Next slide. So a little bit of a history for the bylaw. The city of Kawartha Lakes, or I guess the predecessor county Victoria prior, created a mandatory connection bylaw in 2005. April of 2005 to be specific. The document was a generic document requiring connection of the services. However, at the time, it was never proactively enforced. So although there was a bylaw there was never a drive to actually force properties to connect to the system. So in 2014, it was recognized that there were some challenges to that bylaw. Staff were being challenged to ensure that the systems were being used properly, were fiscally sustainable, and a number of other challenges. So a Lean Six Sigma project was initiated, reviewed by a number of different departments and resources, and then identified a number of deficiencies within that, within the existing bylaw. So those deficiencies, definitions, wording, enforcement capability, penalties, responsibilities for remedial works and costs associated with it, recovery, power of entry, all those things were not included in the original bylaw. So in 2014, staff brought an amended bylaw forward to council with a recommendation to move forward and received endorsement from council at that time. So there's as part of that review, there was a direction to review a phase-in implementation with a pilot program initiated in Finland Falls. So before we go in and talk about the pilot project, go to the next slide. These next two slides, I'm not going to go through. sorry, I jumped ahead on myself here. So, oh yeah, so if I can have the next slide, please. Yeah, so there's the next slide is about the comparison. So it comes forward and talks to the comparison. So if you look at down on the side, you have CKL bylaw and how we've amended it compared to Stratford, West Grey, the Township of King, Muskoka, City of Cambridge. Next slide, if you don't mind. Again, there's just more comparison. So as part of that 2014 Black Belt project, there was a number of comparisons. Most municipalities put forward a program where the bylaw required mandatory connection. They issued the notices and people systematically were then enforced to connect. Again, within the pilot project, we then, so if you go to the next slide, we talk about the Finland Falls pilot summary. So what we did in 2014 through 2017 is we initiated with that new revised bylaw a process to have people in Finland Falls to connect. So initially there was 36 properties identified. 11 were removed due to wastewater capacity restrictions at the time. So that brought us down to 25. 22 of the 25 properties received a conditional exemption from council, but were required to pay the fixed portion of the user rate. So there's a little bit of internal precedent within our council about exempting people, but requiring fees to be paid. And that was one of the key decisions that came through that pilot project. Ultimately, the remaining 3 properties, two properties actually connected through the mandatory connection process. One of them remained out of compliance, but since has been connected since the reconstruction of Colburn Street in 2021. So through the end of that pilot, there was a number of changes that were recommended at. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about those changes. So post the pilot there in September 2017, recognizing what council had made the decisions through the pilot to exempt those 22 properties from the requirement to connect, but require them to pay the fees. Council opted to impose those fees on all properties that were met the requirements of the mandatory connection bylaw, but that weren't actually going to be challenged to connect immediately. So what council said is after a 3-month notification period, we would start to charge them similar to how we exempted those properties in Finland Falls through the pilot. So the amendment again was in alignment with the council adopted resolution for properties to receive those conditional exemptions in Finland Falls. And those revenues help cover basic costs for maintenance and replacement of that infrastructure. So that was 2017. If we move to the next slide, January 2019. So here's where council started to, engage in some of the concerns with the cost of a connection, as well as people, just generally having their private infrastructure that they wanted to sustain. So what council opted to do is timing for the physical connection was amended from the 18 months, which is what was in the 2014 pilot, the 2014 bylaw, to upon failure of existing private infrastructure. So when the well or septic system failed, instead of replacing it with new private infrastructure, the mandate would then be triggered to connect to the municipal infrastructure. So council amendment was made to ease the financial burden on property owners and allow the connection of the private infrastructure at the time of that failure. So again, property owners would be required to make a pretty substantial investment in infrastructure anyway, so the requirement to connect would be triggered at that time. So the decision also eased some pressure and resources on city departments administrating the connection process as well. Next slide. Move forward to December of 2019. Council reviewed the mandatory fee that residents were paying as part of that process, and again, ongoing concerns with people paying that fee in lieu of connect. And council established a fee of $50 per quarter for each water and wastewater service in lieu of the fee that was identified within the bylaw. So council directed staff to modify the fees being charged to people that were on that qualified under the bylaw but would not be connected until such time as their services failed. And that program was rolled out and ultimately is in place currently as we speak. Again, the fee was chosen, considered a compromise to charging the full fixed rate. And keep in mind, it was also in lieu of the requirement to mandatory connect, which again, most municipalities in the province opted to initially. So several concessions made by council, in good faith and in goodwill to try to alleviate some of the burdens of the mandatory connection bylaw. Again, the reduced rate considers that the full benefit's not being received while they're not connected to the system, but also allows the collection of some of those fees to offset the operation and maintenance costs of that infrastructure. Move forward to the next slide. So where we're at from a fiscal perspective, so there's currently about $35,000 is collected from mandatory connection fees. Since 2017, a total of about $157,250 has been collected. Again, the overall wastewater budget is substantial when you consider all the infrastructure being managed at about 24 million. So collected revenues are a small component of that budget, but again, it's about the principle of fairness and concessions that council's made through the mandatory connection process to try to alleviate some of the initial burden that they would be otherwise subject to if the mandatory connection process were to be implemented immediately. Payment of fees and properties receive benefit have services available to them, so they're actually expected to contribute to the maintenance and operation of the system. And again, the principle of fairness is similar to property taxes. Not everybody uses the library system, or not everybody uses other municipal services, but the services are available to them, and the contribution is expected for that service. So that's the general overview from a financial perspective. If we just move forward one more slide, we talk in just a general summary of where we're at. So the mandatory connection program has been a successfully implemented program across the province. There's been many municipalities that rolled out, did not really offer a lot of concessions or relief of burden, and just really mandated that service connection. Recognize that our council has opted to provide some relief, and congratulate them on those decisions. Obviously it's triggered some additional concerns that we're here to address today. So again, it aligns with the Municipal Act, has been amended by several times by council to ease the burden. The program currently is benefiting properties, by offering them a reduced fee in lieu of immediate requirement to connect. A relief of the mandatory connection transfers burden to existing users. So again, any additional relief we provide, the costs are still there. So that just means that the existing users are going to end up covering the cost for the people that aren't being required to connect under the mandatory connection process. And at this time, staff are really not recommending any further actions or amendments to the policy. So that's the general summary. I don't know if there's any, I move to the next slide. It's just if there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Thanks, Director. Appreciate it. Just get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions on the presentation. Councillor Yeo and Vale. I have a question, Brian. Why you're not looking for anything from council today, obviously, with this report. So why are we getting this update? Nothing's really changed. Council's settled after many changes on a $50 per quarter fee for water and $50 for wastewater if it's available. Seems to be a good compromise. Why are we getting an update today on where we stand if you're not looking for any further direction? Just curious.
Yeah, so the update today is being provided just to bring council up to current awareness of the mandatory connection bylaw. It's also tied to item 16.3.4, which is a closed session item related to the mandatory connection bylaw and request from a consumer coalition that has concerns with the bylaw.
Yeah, and the legality of the bylaw we'll deal with in closed, obviously, but so you're not looking for anything from council today. It's just a summary of the process and how we got to where we are today, correct?
Yeah, it's purely an informational review just to ensure some of the councillors weren't around when the original bylaw was put into place and some of the amendments were made and decisions thereof through the process. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of how we got to where we're at currently. And again, yes, the legalities will be dealt with through closed session.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, part of the question or part of the comment, I guess, was addressed by the director. It's a result of a lawyer coming to council and requesting that the mandatory, that the people that are non-compliant with the mandatory hookup be placed on some sort of grandfathering list, I guess for want of a better description, and not be charged. And he went a step further and asked that they be refunded for all the money. So that was the basis of it. It was referred back to staff for a report. My question, probably to you or maybe through you to the CAO, I know we're receiving a report enclosed. I don't think the discussion is so much on the legality of it, but I can't think of a better word, but the morality of it, and that's the best word I can come up with. We've walked this back now. Probably in 2014, I probably voted in favor of it. I don't know, but I probably did. And we've seen the unintended consequences. And councils over the last 7 years, we've recognized that maybe that decision made in 2014 was not the best decision we possibly could have made, and we've recognized that by removing the mandatory hookup until the systems fail. I thought that was a fair compromise. And that's probably where we should have stopped, but we decided to assess the fixed interests, and we reviewed it again. And we said, well, maybe those fixed costs are too high, and we reduced them again. So the question is, these people, these 134 people, never asked for and were never consulted as far as being forced to hook up. In fact, by some of the locations, they probably tried to hook up, and at the time, because it was the town of Lindsay, when they built their house, and the town of Lindsay said, no, this is our water system, you can't have any. They weren't even allowed to and were forced to put in their own systems. That's some of the houses, that's not them all by any means. But when they built their homes, this water system was not available to them. Because I agree with mandatory hookup. I think that Kraft Homes and Tribute and all the rest of them have to hook up to the system. We're talking about 135 people here. And I have strong feelings, obviously, that we're doing these 135 people a disservice by forcing them to pay. So I'll have a follow-up motion anyway after the receive is done, if you don't mind, because I think we can still do that portion and opened.
Yeah, when we deal with the report. This is just the presentation. So, okay. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Question to the director. This is pertaining to the report. Could you sort of define or explain what it says transfers the burden to existing users? There was a second from the bottom.
Yep. Sure, absolutely. So the current exempted properties from the mandatory connection are required to pay a fee right now under the bylaw. So they're paying that cost per month or per quarter or whatever it is for the for access to the system, but they're not being required to connect until their infrastructure fails. If that fee is terminated and no longer is collected, the cost of operating the system remains the same. So that fee then transfers on to the burden of the other users. So the other users will have to generate the additional revenue lost from this mandatory connection process. So again, encouraging that we don't do anything or make any decisions at this time until council's had an opportunity to hear from the city solicitor in closed session.
And just one more question. The fines, when I was looking at the chart there, 100,000, are we at the very high end of the fines as opposed to other municipalities? I see West Grey, they're quite a bit less, but we seem to be at the very top end of the fines. I see 100,000. Was that established? When was that established, and why are we at the highest rate of fines?
Through Mr. Mayor to the councillor. So the fees, the penalty or enforcement section of the bylaw was consistent from 2014. That is an up to limit depending on what happens and how the enforcement process happens. So we've obviously never imposed any kind of fee of that nature, but having the bylaw the ability to process fees and penalties and appropriate recoveries is essential to making sure that the bylaw is enforceable.
Okay, thanks. So if a user could be either fined or, in a case, Mimi Walnut Street, where all these charges are put on their taxes, they could be thousands of dollars. So that's the other route that the city goes if they don't choose to go the fine route. They put it on the property owner's taxes.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council, you're getting a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I believe the bylaw does have the capability where if there's a default in payment, no different than property taxes, we have the ability to transfer those costs and actually recover them through the enforcement section of that bylaw.
Thank you. Any other questions to receive the presentation? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. So I'll take you to the report 11211 that Amber Hayter put together regarding pretty much the same as the presentation. There's a motion that report WWW 2022-001 mandatory connection bylaw review be received. Let's do that first. Councillor Yeo, second by Councillor Elmsley. Any questions on that? All in favor? That's passed. You had a follow-up motion, Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, 10-4, I'll give you a motion that the 135, I think it is, non-compliant water users be grandfathered in, and at such time, because the conditions are already there, be grandfathered in, and that fees for not hooking up be waived. And everything else is already there, so it's just a matter of grandfathering them in and waiving the fees. So I'll give you that as a motion.
Okay, moved by Councillor Dunn, second. Second by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're down to 135 people, 135 families. At $50 a pop, you're looking at $7,000 a quarter, $28,000 a month on a $4 million budget?
$24 million.
$24 million budget. Not a very significant thing. These people didn't ask for it. As I said, and probably at the time when they were building, it probably wasn't available to them. I just don't think it's right. And obviously by the decisions council has made in the past, we've always been trying to find a compromise without actually throwing in the towel. I just think it's time we should throw in the towel, recognize it, and move on.
So just for my clarity, you're proposing that we keep the mandatory connect bylaw on failure of the system. They got to connect. They have so much time to connect. All you're suggesting be waived is the $50 per quarter
fees,
fixed rate.
Yeah.
Until they do connect.
Until they do connect.
Okay. And you seconded by Councillor Seymour Fagan. Do you want to speak to it? No. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Councillor Elmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll speak against the motion. I think that, as the director has pointed out, if it's not collected from these folks, then the users will pay more. And there is an advantage to having water running in front of your house. It feeds the fire hydrants, and there may be other benefits as well. And if your well fails, you have access to water more readily. So I think that, either we have a mandatory connect bylaw and there's a fee attached to it, or we don't have a mandatory connect bylaw at all, and we don't do anything. So I'm in favor of the status quo.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Do you want to sum up?
Just very briefly, those services have always been available. We have depending where you are in your fire area, your trucks fill up there anyway. So even the ones that can't get it, the farmer in between Oakwood and Little Britain, or between Oakwood and Lindsay, He doesn't have that water available, but they're still going to come back to Lindsay to get it when they do their reshuttle qualifications. This is just a fundamentally thing of fairness as far as I'm concerned. And as I said before, we've recognized that by the fact that we keep on cutting back. I just think we should be done with it, and then we won't have to face, it's $7,000. And I'll pay the extra 25 cents that cost me on my water bill, and I bet you my neighbors will do the same thing, just to help their, just to be fair. So it's not a huge dollar.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. We have a motion to receive. Any other follow-ups? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you. Thank you, Director. Appreciate the update. We have no petitions. Item 12, bylaws. Councillor Yeo, you have the bylaws. Councillor Elmsley, you had some questions around 14.11, the bylaw regarding the ATVs and the ORVs. I assume those questions were answered in our update when we dealt with the monitoring report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, they were.
Okay, so you're good. Are there any other extractions from the bylaws? Okay, Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, moved by myself, second by Councillor Seymour Fagan, that the bylaws shown in section 14.1 of the agenda, namely items 14.1.12 and including 14.1.17, be read a first, second, third time passed, numbered, signed, and the corporate seal attached.
Thank you. All in favor? And that's passed. Okay, we're going to go, we have no notice of motion, number 15. We now, sorry. Sorry, almost missed it. Bylaws extracted from consent, 14.2.1, the drainage bylaw, and 14.2.2, drainage improvements about the drain. So what do I have to do, read these? Madam Clerk, am I reading these bylaws? Yes. Bylaw to provide for drainage works in the city of Kawartha Lakes to be known as a McEachern-Brown Municipal Drain, be read a first and second reading. Do I need a motion for that, or the rest of it as well? Continue that a bylaw to provide for drainage works in the city of Kawartha Lakes to be known as a McEachern-Brown Municipal Drain bylaw be read a first and second time, provisionally adopted and numbered. Get a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Elmsley, I knew that. Seconded by Councillor Vale, thank you. All in favor? That's passed. And the second one, that a bylaw to provide for the Section 78 drainage improvements on the Hugh Davidson Municipal Drain in the city of Kawartha Lakes, first and second reading, and that a bylaw to provide for the Section 78 drainage improvements on the Hugh Davidson Municipal Drain in the city of Kawartha Lakes be read a first and second time, provisionally adopted and numbered. Need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor O'Reilly and Ashmore, all in favor? That's passed. We good? Thanks for catching me. It's good to have this glass, eh? You can bang on it when I miss something. Like being in the penalty box. 15, notice of motion. We have none. Closed session. Can I get a motion for the adoption of the closed session agenda, please? Councillor Elmsley and Yeo, all in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in closed session items? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yeah, I'd like to recuse myself from, it is report LGL 2022-08, appeal to the council decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal for 12 Mansfield. There is an active investigation with me and the Integrity Commissioner, so I will not be here for that.
So item 16.3.5 in closed session, and you'll leave the room for that discussion?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Any other disclosure of pecuniary interest in closed session items? Seeing none, at this point of the meeting, City Council will go into closed session to consider the item under section 16.3 of the agenda. All remaining staff, with the exception of the CAO, City Clerk, and City Solicitor, are now instructed to leave the electronic meeting at this time. As per our procedural bylaw requirements, I'm asking all remaining participants in our meeting today to confirm to me, to come on the screen, turn on your camera, and raise your hand. Is it just Robin? That's all we have? Or Robin's all by herself? Can I get that off the screen? What is that? That's okay. Okay, so you'll confirm to me by raising your hand that you're in a private room where no other person can overhear the deliberations and the internet connection is secure and not publicly accessible? Okay, acknowledged, thank you. Can I get a mover and a seconder for the following motion? That council convene into closed session at 2:55 p.m. pursuant to section 239-2 of the Municipal Act in order to consider matters identified in section 16.3 of the regular council meeting agenda of Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, namely items 16.3.1 to and including 16.3.8. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Councillor Yeo, second by Councillor O'Reilly. All those in favor? And that's passed. It's carried. At this point, the meeting broadcast will now end for members of the public watching on your TV cable, Cogeco. The live stream of the meeting on YouTube will now be temporarily paused for members of the public. When closed session is complete, the live stream of the meeting will resume to address the remaining open session items on the agenda. And we'll take a few minutes break, and when we come back, we'll be in closed session. Thank you. Okay, we're back in open session. We've got a few matters from closed session that the Madam Clerk is going to deal with. Go ahead.
Matters from closed session. Item 16.3.1, confidential closed minutes, that the confidential closed minutes from February 22nd regular council meeting were approved. Item 16.3.2, report ED 2022-021. A motion is required that Alana Forsyth of Alana Maria Design Company be appointed to the Lindsay Business Improvement Area Local Board for the remaining term of council in accordance with Section 2.02 of the bylaw 2008-212.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Dunn. Yes. Second by Councillor O'Reilly. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you.
Item 16.3.3, report LGL 2022-006. The city solicitor provided information pertaining to litigation commenced by Maple Ridge Mechanical Contracting, Inc. against the city, being Superior Court File 19-142, and obtained instruction pertaining to the same. Item 16.3.4, report LGL 2022-007. The city solicitor presented information to council for its consideration pertaining to the matter of the mandatory connection bylaw review, report WWW 2022-001 on the council agenda. Item 16.3.5, report LGL 2022-008. The city solicitor presented information to council for its consideration pertaining to the matter of the appeal of council decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal pertaining to 12 Mansfield Street, Bob Caget, and being tribunal case number OLT-21-001765. The city solicitor received instruction pertaining to the same. Item 16.3.6, report LGL 2022-009. The city solicitor presented an update to council on the status of negotiations of the framework development agreement to be entered into between the city and Flato and associated with a ministerial zoning order issued for property owned by Flato in Lindsay. The city solicitor presented an update to council on the status of negotiations of the framework development agreement to be entered into between the city and Flato, associated with the ministerial zoning order issued for property owned by Bromont Homes, Inc. in Lindsay. Item 16.3.7, report LGL 2022-010. The city solicitor presented information to council pertaining to the status of the appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal, being case number PL 171407 of Official Plan Amendment 13 and secondary plans to the City of Kawartha Lakes Comprehensive Official Plan 2012. The city solicitor received instruction.
Thank you. Regarding 16.3.8, the Code of Conduct and Ethics investigation for a member of council, the Integrity Commissioner's investigation report IC 14166-0621 was reported to council in closed session in accordance with Section 223.6, bracket 1 of the Municipal Act 2001. The Integrity Commissioner concluded that Councillor Ashmore breached Sections 9.2, bracket A, 9.3 bracket C, and Section 4.1 bracket A of the City of Kawartha Lakes Code of Conduct and Ethics for members of council and local boards, and recommended penalties for the breach. Council has directed that Council Ashmore receive a penalty as follows. Suspended remuneration 14 days, one pay period, including expenses from the city commencing May 2nd, 2022. The city will make the report received from the Integrity Commissioner available to the public forthwith in accordance with Section 223.6, Bracket 3 of the Municipal Act 2001. The report will be posted on the city's website by end of day, March 23rd, 2022. Thank you. Item 18 is a confirming bylaw. Councillor Seymour Fagan, I think you have that. That's why you're supposed to open your folder. How about a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular council meeting of March 22nd? Moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Yeo. Thank you. All in favor? And that's passed. And a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Dunn. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.